Like comedians.
I couldn't know that, but everyone's pitching themselves to somebody. So when I hear a comedian do something like that, or I hear a comedian talk about how terrible it was that they went home and their parents were like the most racist people ever and they were so out of touch and whatever. And it's usually like, my parents are trying to be liberal, but they're not, and here's why they're evil. And you're like, okay.
In this video, Tim Dillon sits down with CNN for a long-form interview. Tim Dillon has to explain comedy, humor, and Joe Rogan, among other things, to the interviewer. With that, let's watch Tim Dillon educate the most clueless interview on the planet.
So I'm sure you're aware of the, like, where's the liberal Joe Rogan, like that whole conversation.
Yes, that is a question they're asking.
That is a question they're asking. So I mean, I was interested in that. I like did a lot of research, but I think that's maybe not the most interesting question. Yeah. However, I think you have to admit, like, Joe Rogan has changed comedy.
I think Joe Rogan has changed media.
Can you explain how that works?
Well, Joe Rogan has this amazingly popular platform where he's led by his interests, meaning like he's bringing on people that have these long-form conversations. In a world where everything's like consumed in like 30-second clips or 60-second clips and 15-second clips, Joe Rogan is having 3-hour discussions with people on anything from conspiracy theories to science to paleontology. He's all over the map, but he's led by his interests and he's accountable to himself and his audience, right? I mean, he's kind of like blazed this trail of like, I'm interested in certain things and I'm going to talk about them with people who I find interesting. There's no real media that was structured like that ever, right? I mean, that's not how any of these companies were structured. It wasn't like, come on in, what are you guys interested in? Let's talk about it. It was kind of like, these are the stories and here's how we're going to cover them and here's the angles. So I think the entire structure of what Rogan has done has changed everything because it's opened up this idea that you could do that. You could pursue a strategy of talking to people that you find interesting and then growing a tremendously successful platform out of that.
Rogan moved to Austin, opened a comedy club there, and now all these comedians have moved to Austin to be part of that world.
Yeah.
Like, how does that work? Like, what is that like?
I think it's like any type of clubhouse that you have, right? So you have like all of these different great clubs, and you have a Comedy Cellar in New York and Comedy Store in LA. And, you know, he's opened a great comedy club in Austin where we have a lot of people go there to perform and to, there's a lot of comedy fans that go. So he's cultivated a lot of people that want to come, and he's made it kind of a destination for people that want to see comedy.
Is it a particular kind of comedy?
I think in some cases, yes.
Like, is it anti-woke or?
I think you're far less likely to find that type. Like, the word woke is kind of a boring word, but like.
You know, another reason that people gravitated towards Austin when Joe Rogan went there is he created an amazing comedy scene in Austin, Texas. But what they're leaving out is, why were they leaving? They were never even considering leaving, 10 years ago, maybe over 5 years ago. I think it really started with the pandemic and how poorly California handled that and turned it into an authoritarian government where their leaders didn't follow these very strict edicts. The taxes kept rising, cities burning down with either wildfires, looting. And even though you're giving all this money to the state of California, you get nothing in return. Nothing ever improves there. So I think that's a big component as to why a lot of people went to Austin. Anyway, let's get back to it.
Like, I think you're absolutely more likely to find the type of comedy that Joe likes at his comedy club, which is like kind of edgy, no holds barred, in the sense that, like, they're not policing anybody can say anything as long as there's a good faith effort to make it funny. Mm-hmm. So I think that there are people that believe, and they're well within their rights to believe this, that there are topics and words that are off limits. And I don't think Joe feels that way. I think he feels that, like, the people that come into the club, if they have a good faith effort to make a topic funny or an idea funny, that they should be allowed the space to do that. And there are people that disagree with him on that. And there are places that you're far less likely to see certain topics talked about in a funny way because people just they believe that they're off the table.
And, like, what's your relationship with Rogan? Like, you've been on his show.
He's my father.
Well, you've been on his show.
We've never talked about it, and it's because I'm overweight. And he will not admit it.
He's really into
he is my father. No, I've been on his show multiple. He's a great friend. I respect him, and he's been very nice and generous to me.
How does going on his show affect your career?
People, he shares his audience. He's got a massive audience. He allows you to come on and say what you want and be funny and be interesting or whatever you're going to be, and he shares his audience. It's a very generous thing to do, and there's not a lot of people who do that. By the way, there's not.
Tell me more about that.
Well, there's just not tons of people at his level that give opportunities to people the way he does.
Yeah.
There are some.
But does a young comedian have to shape his act to try to
Not
fit
at all.
in that
Joe Rogan's one it's a very big podcast, but it's one podcast in a world of podcasts, in a world of social media apps. There are comedians that have blown up on TikTok who are selling out theaters. That why would they need to shape their act? Me, I would never shape anything. Yeah. Me and Joe see a lot of things in a similar way.
Yeah.
Even though we're very different on paper, we see a lot of things in a similar way. So I didn't have to shape it. I don't think people go in there shaping. It would be probably quite obvious if they did.
Okay.
3 hours is a long time with someone. So if you're completely...
If you like watching videos like this one, like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video.
So if you're completely full of SHIT, it might be apparent.
But do you ever look at some comedians who's doing a joke like, DE, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And you're like, that.
I've never heard DE, I don't think so.
I made that up. I tried to do the shortest.
By the way, there is definitely someone doing that.
That's what I mean.
Definitely someone doing that. Yeah, that would be not a good joke.
I know,
That's
but
not a great joke.
All right, let me give you an example.
Okay.
And I won't name the person.
Okay.
But there's a comedian who lives near me.
Okay.
And he has this joke about how he walks all around New York and he sees all these flags from all these different countries, but he never sees the American flag.
Yeah.
Well, we live near each other, and I know he's talking about this little Caribbean grocery store that's got a little plastic streamer of Caribbean flags, and I'm like, it feels a little phony to me. And I'm like, it feels like he's trying to appeal to a certain audience. I'm not accusing you of that, by the way.
No. I mean, I've never been to that Caribbean grocery store. I don't live in your neighborhood.
What a terrible leap in logic that woman had to make to try and make the argument that people tailor their comedy towards right-wing comedy, I guess. She lives near a comedian. He does a joke about how you can hang any kind of flag you want from any other country, gay pride, Black Lives Matter, and that's no problem. But there always seems to be a problem with the American flag, and you don't see as many of them. I think 100% of normal people would fully agree with that. So that's just a joke. He may have added some poetic license. I don't know if he mentioned that store specifically, but she's using a little piece of information she knows about the guy to assume that he's shaping his act somehow. And I guess since this lady works for CNN, she can't fathom the idea that maybe that comedian just feels that way and thought of a good way to use it in a joke, and it worked. For her, that's insane to believe because of the bubble she lives in. But for normal people, we know, yeah, that is a problem right now. Anyway, let's wrap up the video.
Do I think people exaggerate things for the benefit of comedy? Probably all the time.
But are they pitching themselves to a Fox audience? Comedians.
I couldn't know that, but does everyone's pitching themselves to somebody? So when I hear a comedian do something like that, or I hear a comedian talk about how terrible it was that they went home and their parents were the most racist people ever, and they were so out of touch and whatever, and it's usually my parents are trying to be liberal, but they're not, and here's why they're evil. And you're like, okay. It usually feels like it's something that's been wildly blown out of proportion because that's most of comedy, right? It's taking something and then extrapolating something from it. I mean, I don't know that particular joke, but it just feels like the basis of a lot of jokes is let's blow something up beyond the scope of its actual meaning to make it kind of goofy or make it symbolic of something else. So.
But we want to hear from you. What do you guys think about this interview of Tim Dillon by this clueless CNN lady? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, as always, really appreciate you watching, and we will see you in the next one.